Have you ever felt fragile, like any criticism could shatter you into pieces? Have you ever gotten tired of wearing that mask of strength? Smiling on the outside while bleeding on the inside? Maybe you've noticed yourself repeating the same patterns of self-sabotage without even knowing why. The fear of not being enough and the anxiety of not being able to control how others react quietly eat you alive. But what if I told you none of this means weakness? Carl Jung discovered that behind this pain lies an opportunity for transformation. He called it the integration of the shadow, the process that makes you stop living for other people's opinions and start uncovering your true authenticity. Suffering isn't failure. It's a messenger pointing to where your hidden strength lives. Now imagine becoming emotionally unshakable, finding clarity and inner peace, no longer depending on what others say or do, turning every criticism into fuel, every rejection into a lesson, every pain into growth. Becoming untouchable isn't about going cold. It's about being free. Free to live your life without asking for permission. And if you've made it here, it's not by accident. This video is for you. The one who's ready to walk through the fire and come out the other side stronger, whole, and more awake. So drop a comment right now and tell me which country you're watching from, because this is the start of a community of people who've decided to turn pain into freedom. You've probably heard that line, "I don't care what anybody thinks of me." But let's be real, most people who say that are lying to themselves, because deep down, in the silence, it still stings. The real transformation isn't some fake shield you put up to look tough. It's something that happens inside you, a shift so deep that other people's opinions lose their grip. It's not about turning cold. It's about becoming whole. Carl Jung called this emotional immunity. He noticed in his patients that there comes a point when criticism, insults, or rejection just don't shake you anymore. Not because you've hardened, but because you've gone through an inner shift. Picture yourself standing in the middle of a storm, but instead of being blown away, you discover roots so strong that nothing can pull you out of place. That's the difference between faking strength and becoming truly unshakable. A lot of folks mix up transformation with repression. Repression is like locking a wild animal in a cage. Sooner or later, it's going to break out and wreak havoc. Transformation is different. It's like taming that animal until it becomes your ally. Pain stops being your enemy and turns into fuel. Shame turns into clarity. Anger turns into precision. You don't stop feeling, but you start choosing what to do with what you feel. That's the turning point that separates prisoners from the free. Jung, for example, described patients who came into his clinic wrecked by their craving for approval. They lived on edge, constantly trying to meet everyone else's expectations, until one breaking point, a betrayal, a loss, a deep rejection, forced them to look inward. And out of that wound came transformation. Instead of shutting down in resentment, they began to see with frightening clarity just how much of their life was being lived for others and not for themselves. You can practice this with small things. Say someone criticizes the way you dress. Instead of justifying yourself or obsessing over it, try replying in your head, "Interesting." That says a lot about their taste, not about who I am. Sounds simple, right? But that little line builds an inner wall that starts changing how you deal with the world. Over time, you realize you don't need armor, because there's nothing left that can really wound you. And that's where the promise of transformation starts to come true. Because when you stop being driven by approval, a new space opens up inside you, almost sacred. That space is where your clarity, authenticity, and true strength live. And trust me, this is only the beginning, because the next step goes even deeper. Do you really think what hurts is the criticism itself? The rejection? That sideways glance? Truth is, it's not. What stings isn't what the other person does, but what that gesture wakes up inside of you. It's like the external action is just the match being struck, but the flame only catches because there was already fuel piled up within. Pain doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the wound that was already open. There's even a name for this in depth psychology, the shadow mirror effect. The other person, without even realizing it, just touches the parts of yourself you haven't made peace with yet. Like when someone questions your competence. If deep down you already doubt your worth, that criticism echoes like it's the truth. But if you're grounded, that same comment loses all its bite. What triggers the pain isn't the word. It's the fragile spot it lands on. Picture this: you've got a cut on your arm. Any little bump, even a soft one, makes you flinch in pain. Now picture the same touch on an arm with no wound, nothing happens. That's the perfect analogy for why some situations crush you while others seem to slide right off someone else. It's not that you're weak. It's that there are unhealed wounds inside you that turn every outside gesture into a trigger. Jung saw this pattern over and over again in his patients. People swore they were suffering because of someone specific, when in reality they were just replaying old scripts. Childhood rejections, unresolved humiliations, buried memories. The other person became nothing more than a stage where those old pains came back to life. Until they saw this clearly, they stayed trapped in a cycle of resentment, reacting to the same wound again and again. That's why freedom isn't about dodging criticism or trying to control the world. It's about facing what inside you still hurts. When you spot the wound, the criticism stops being poison and starts being a diagnosis. This spot's still sensitive. This part still needs healing. That shift in perspective is already a massive step toward emotional immunity, because it turns every jab into a chance for self-discovery. And hey, if what I've said so far makes sense, take a second, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. It lets me know this message is landing where it needs to and keeps me motivated to bring you more. But stick with me, because in the next part you'll see that real transformation doesn't come from running away from pain. It comes from the surgical way you learn to handle it. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In other words, as long as you don't shine a light on what's hidden inside you, you'll keep reacting on autopilot, thinking it's just bad luck or destiny. The real battlefield isn't what people say or do. It's the invisible space between what you feel and how you respond. The enemy isn't out there. It's buried in your unconscious. That's why the same insult can crush one person and roll right off another. Take being called useless, for example. It only hurts someone who already carries that doubt inside. For someone who knows their worth, the word sounds hollow, almost meaningless. That's proof the pain isn't in the phrase itself. It's in what it stirs up inside each of us. The unconscious is where all those hidden scripts live. This is where the idea of the reaction gap comes in, the space between stimulus and response. That tiny gap is where your freedom lives. Without awareness, you react on impulse. You blow up, shut down, or eat yourself alive in silence. But once you notice the gap, you can choose what to do with the trigger. It's like someone throwing you a fireball. You decide whether to catch it with bare hands or let it drop and burn out on its own. A good analogy is to picture insults floating in the air like balloons. They only get heavy when you grab them. As long as they're left hanging, they can't touch you. But the moment you reach out and hold on, they turn into emotional baggage. That unconscious move is what makes you carry pain that wasn't even yours to begin with. Making the unconscious conscious is learning to spot that move before it happens. Jung shared stories of patients who, after this awakening, stopped feeling like victims of fate. They realized it wasn't the insults or rejections that dictated their pain. It was the invisible choice to grab or not grab those triggers. That insight flipped everything. Life stopped being a war against others and became an internal battlefield, where every victory was a win over themselves. And this is where transformation starts to take real shape. Because when you see you can choose between reacting or just observing, a new sense of power and clarity shows up. But here's the kicker. It's not enough to just spot the battle. You've got to learn how to use that energy creatively, without letting it rot inside you. And that's exactly what we'll dig into in the next step. How many times have you heard someone say, "I don't care about anything anymore"? Maybe you've even said it yourself, trying to convince the world, and maybe even yourself, that you're untouchable. But behind those words, there's often nothing more than a fake shield. The person says they don't feel, but inside they're still bleeding. Pretending not to care isn't healing. It's just another way of hiding the wound without treating it. Jung was clear about this. Real healing doesn't come from hardening. It comes from integrating the shadow. What you repress comes back. What you pretend doesn't exist will eventually charge interest. And while you're busy building walls to keep out the pain, you're also blocking the chance to uncover the strength hidden inside it. Transformation isn't about going cold. It's about becoming whole, accepting that inside you there's both light and darkness, strength and fragility, courage and fear. He even used a powerful metaphor. Depression is like a lady in black. If she turns up, don't send her away. Invite her in, offer her a seat, and listen to what she has to say. In other words, suffering isn't an enemy to be kicked out, but a messenger carrying clues about what inside you still needs to be seen. When you listen, you find a map. When you reject it, you just keep running in circles. Think about how exhausting it is to carry around a fake armor. You're always on guard, controlling words, reactions, appearances. It's like lugging around a heavy shield everywhere you go, even inside your own home. And the worst part? Nobody notices because from the outside you look fine. But inside, the wounds stay raw. Real integration, on the other hand, lifts that weight off your shoulders. You don't have to fake it anymore. You can just be. And here's the kicker. The very suffering you're so afraid of is the same one that can set you free. When it shows up, instead of treating it like a flaw, start treating it like a teacher. It points to where you're still vulnerable, where you're still chained to other people's opinions, where you still need to grow stronger. Instead of asking, "Why me?" shift the question to, "What is this trying to show me?" That one small change opens doors. And this is exactly where the journey starts to deepen. Because integrating the shadow isn't just about surviving pain. It's about learning how to use it as a guide. It's realizing that even suffering has a purpose, and that once you learn to listen to it, it loses its power to paralyze you. In the next step, we'll see how this clarity turns into surgical calm, the kind that shocks people precisely because you don't react the way they expect. The path to true transformation runs through something very few have the guts to face: dismantling the persona. That social mask you put on every day, to be accepted, to look strong, to avoid letting people down, has to fall at some point. And when it does, you come face to face with an uncomfortable emptiness, almost like a symbolic death. The death of the ego. That's the beginning of the individuation process. At this stage, strength doesn't come because you've learned better defenses, but because you've already walked through the fire. Whoever faces the loss of the persona realizes there's nothing to fear from outside judgment, because the inner judgment has already been confronted. It's like tempered steel. It isn't born strong, but becomes unbreakable precisely because it's been through extreme heat. Suffering isn't the end. It's the forge that shapes real solidity. Jung described this process as building a fortress of inner boundaries, what we can call a boundary fortress. Instead of wasting energy reacting to everything, you set up internal filters that decide what deserves to come in and what doesn't. 3 criteria guide those filters: relevance, ownership, and identity. In other words, is this important to me? Does this really belong to me? Does this define who I am? Here's a clear example. Imagine a client calling your work amateur. If you lack clarity, that insult pierces like an arrow and steals your peace. But if your boundary fortress is standing tall, the filter kicks in. You notice that the comment says more about the client's insecurity than your competence. The weight isn't yours, so you let it pass. Just like that, the criticism loses its power before it even touches you. This individuation process doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. Actually, it's the opposite. It means stepping back into relationships without being enslaved by masks or external expectations. You start acting in line with your real identity, no longer to please or to avoid rejection. It's a quiet rebirth, where every decision stops being fueled by fear and starts being fueled by clarity. And this is where the journey deepens even more. Because once you free yourself from masks and build your inner fortress, you don't just find stability. You discover a calm that confuses those who once knew exactly how to hurt you. That surgical calm, which almost looks supernatural, is living proof you don't have to react to everything. And it's exactly that state we're going to explore in the next step. Healing isn't about shutting yourself off from the world or building walls of hardness. It happens when you turn awareness into a shield. And here's the thing. It's not a shield that blocks everything, but one that lets in only what truly matters. Awareness creates such clarity that criticism, provocations, and drama stop being attacks. They just become noise that has nowhere to stick. Think about the ocean metaphor. Those who live only on the surface suffer with every wave, every tide, every storm. But those who learn to dive discover the silence and stability of the deep. Awareness is that dive, an inner space where nothing external can throw you off balance. Down there, life still moves, but you realize you don't have to react to every ripple on the surface. This process can be called emotional alchemy, the art of turning triggers into psychological gold. Every time someone tries to provoke you, you can choose, react the same old way, or use it as raw material to get stronger. An insult becomes self-knowledge, rejection becomes a chance to stand tall, criticism becomes clarity about the other person. You stop being the victim and start being the alchemist of your own life. At the final stage, something I call the compassionate warrior shows up. It's the point where you learn to help others without absorbing their chaos. You stay empathetic, but you don't carry weights that aren't yours. It's like offering a steady hand without letting them pull you into the pit. This stance blends strength with compassion, clarity with presence, and it's the peak of true emotional immunity. The most powerful part of this journey is realizing that nothing outside of you needs to change for your life to change. The world will keep throwing criticism, rejection, and provocation your way, but you shift how you handle them, and that completely rewires the way you experience life. What once was a trigger now becomes fuel. What once was pain now becomes wisdom. That's the real path to healing. And when you start tasting this calm and strength, one inevitable question arises. How do you sustain this new state without falling back into old patterns? That's exactly what we'll close in the next step, where you'll discover that true freedom isn't about controlling the world, but about no longer being controlled by it. Being unshakable doesn't mean becoming indifferent or apathetic. On the contrary, it's the freedom to choose where you put your energy. It's not about ignoring life, but about carefully selecting what deserves your attention and what's just noise. That's real emotional maturity, not wasting gunpowder on useless fireworks. Once you get this, you realize that not caring is actually the beginning of truly living. Take anonymous comments online, for example. A lot of people let themselves get torn down by words thrown out by folks who don't even have the guts to show their face. But once you see where it's coming from, you know it's not worth the drain. It's like arguing with the wind. It blows, but you decide whether you'll waste your time trying to push it back. That simple choice of not responding is already an act of sovereignty. Another practical example is focusing on personal projects. When you stop burning energy trying to please everyone or clap back at every critique, you suddenly free up time to build what actually matters. Your career, your body, your real relationships. That's where genuine productivity is born, because the energy that used to leak out to the external turns into fuel to create from within. And then there's the lightness of laughing at predictable criticism. Once you really know yourself, you see that most negative comments are almost automatic, repetitive. Instead of cutting you, they make you smile, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. It's like hearing an old joke that's lost its punchline. The impact fades because you no longer identify with it. Laughter becomes proof the wound has healed. This reframing changes everything. Stopping caring doesn't mean losing your humanity. It means gaining time and energy to live your life. You realize you don't have to spend hours defending your image or lose sleep over what people said. That saved energy turns into presence, clarity, and space to make choices that actually reflect who you are. And this is where the journey takes its most practical shape. Because freedom isn't just a pretty theory, it's a daily practice. Choosing what matters, laughing at what doesn't, and using the rest as fuel for growth. But there's still one final step left, tying all of this together into a clear vision, so you'll never again mistake coldness for true freedom. Now you can see the thread that ties this whole journey together. First, facing the shadow you've always tried to hide. Then, learning to observe instead of react, building inner boundaries, turning triggers into psychological gold, and finally, becoming someone who can help without carrying other people's weight. That's the cycle of true emotional immunity. And here's the most important point. Real strength has nothing to do with hardness. Hardness is fragile, any crack can shatter it. Clarity, on the other hand, is power. The clarity of knowing who you are, what truly belongs to you, and what doesn't deserve a single second of your energy. That clarity is what makes you untouchable. Never forget this line. The strongest person isn't the one who feels nothing, but the one who chooses what deserves to touch their soul. The strongest person isn't the one who blocks everything out, but the one who consciously decides what can and cannot cross their inner walls. That choice, that's your greatest freedom. So if this video spoke to you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel, because here you'll keep finding tools to turn pain into clarity. And share in the comments what resonated with you the most today. Your story might just inspire someone going through the very same thing. If this video helped you, leave a like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. Tell me, which country are you watching from? I read every comment and I want to know you, because this community is growing for people who've decided they're done living as prisoners of other people's opinions. And before you go, here's an invitation. The next video on the screen will show you why losing motivation after facing your shadow isn't failure, but a powerful sign that you're leveling up. Watch it now and keep the journey going.